Hello, my name is Terry Doherty of Old Guard Publishing, and today I'm going to talk about Unclaimed Victory, Fuentes de Honoro, which is now available for pre-order on the Old Guard Publishing website, oldguardpublishing.com. I'm going to go over some of the components of the system, and then in a later video I'm going to start doing some scenario replays. So the first thing we'll go over is the rules. There's basically two primary manuals, the core rules, which have the rules for the various rule sets. There's 3 rule sets in Glory and Empire, and I'll go over that in a moment. The other primary rule book is the companion book, which has all the scenarios and special game rules for terrain and other things that might be particular to this particular scenario. It also has the solo assistant called Aide de Camp, which I'll get into in some other videos. And then also there's a third rule book called the Marshal's Game, which I've gone over in another video that's already posted on my YouTube channel. So with Glory and Empire there are 3 rule sets with the system to allow players to kind of pick their level of complexity that they're comfortable with. If you're kind of new to the series, you probably want to start with the beginner's level, which is the Soldier's Game. And then the intermediate level is what we call the Battalion Game. And then the advanced game is what we call the Brigade Game. So the Soldier's Game has all the basic details you need for maneuvering in this system. So it's a battalion scale system with units as battalions, companies, or regiments. So each hex is 125 meters across. Each turn is 20 minutes. Each strength point of infantry represents 100 men. Each strength point of cavalry represents 50 men, and each strength point of artillery is a section of guns or 1 to 2 guns, depending on the battery. Okay, so there's 3 rule sets, as I outlined before. So we have the Soldier's Game, which is identified on the bottom of the page by the orange stripe. We have the Battalion Game, which is identified by the red stripe on the bottom of the page, and then the Brigade Game is identified by the green stripe on the bottom of the page. And you can think of them as beginners, intermediate, and advanced rule sets. The Soldier's Game is entirely standalone, so all you need to play the Soldier's Game is just this section of rules, and there's a fair amount of index there, so the rules aren't quite as long, plus the type is pretty big and the spacing is generous, and there's quite a few diagrams. The Battalion Game is also standalone. It has everything you need to play the Battalion Game. And I did that so you don't have to go back and forth to refer to the different rule sets. So when you move from the Soldier's Game up to the Battalion Game, or you start with the Battalion Game, you can completely ignore the other set of rules. So the Brigade Game is different. The Brigade Game builds on top of the Battalion Game. So these rules either supersede or add to what's in the Battalion Game. And they basically introduce some a lot more different types of formations, and also some new kinds of command rules and lots of new artillery rules for people that want all the detail. And so basically you can choose your kind of level of complexity that you're comfortable with, and all the scenarios that you play, you can use any of the rule sets. You don't have to restrict yourself to one rule set or another. And if there's anything that applies only to that particular rule set in the game, such as trains, which only apply to the advanced game, then it'll say in the scenario what to do, or in the scenario rules whether to apply these rules or not to that particular scenario. So there are a number of player aid cards that apply to the particular rule set you're interested in, and they have corresponding stripes. So the Brigade Game player aid card has a green stripe at the bottom, although this one's fairly recognizable with all the pretty diagrams on it as applying to the Brigade Game. There's also, for the Soldier's Game, a single player aid card that you'll use mostly during play, and it has the fire chart on it and modifiers for morale checks during assault, and modifiers for other things that happen during assaults and charges. A simplified artillery chart, which has each type of artillery and their ranges for different effects. So you have like canister fire, so you'll apply the canister range, fire strength modifier to your shots if you're shooting at a target within canister range. The color on the row is equal to the color on the counter. So if you have a French 4-pounder, it has a white background on the cannon, so you'll refer to that row. And then French 8-pounder has an orange background, so you'll use that row, and similar for the British and Portuguese 6-pounders and the British 9-pounders. Which there's not a lot of different types of artillery in this game. Some games have many different types of artillery. Then on the other side we got the terrain effects chart, movement rate charts, costs of various things, changing formation, stacking limits, so there's open terrain, light density terrain, medium density terrain, and high density terrain. And on the terrain effects chart it'll say which type it is. There's another type of terrain called hexside obstacles, which is, you can see, is minor rivers, streams, bridges, fords, or greater than 2 contours, or 2 contours being crossed in a single hexside. So there's a similar card for the battalion game. It has, and brigade game. It has more stuff, and you can see it's got the red stripe on the bottom to match the battalion game. And things that are in the red color apply only to the brigade game. So we have formation change costs, and then there's different types of formation change which cost more. Terrain effects chart is the same. Stacking limits, there's a little additional note down here for units in open column in the brigade game. You can force march in the battalion game. That's something you can't do in the soldiers game. And then we have caisson movement rate costs, or movement rate allowances. Reaction formation changes, different types of those in the battalion game, or in the brigade game. Various different types of miscellaneous movement point costs, which apply. Some just apply to the brigade game. Then one big difference between the soldiers and battalion game is disorder checks. If you move too far in certain formations, or if you cross hexside obstacles or change formation, then you have to take a disorder check at the end of your move, which may leave the unit disordered at the end of their movement, or worse if they're already in the disorder morale state. On the other side, with similar, we got the fire chart. Then we have battalion game artillery chart, which adds some ammo consumption. If you roll a low die, you go low ammo. And if you roll another low die, 50% chance to go out of ammo after that, which basically that gives you, a movement phase or two to try and get out of trouble before you're totally out of ammo and vulnerable. Then we have the brigade game artillery chart, which has much more detail. It has different types of rounds. So we have round shot, canister, and shell. So if you look on the counter again, you can see white is the round shot in the fire box. 1 in the blue box is the shell, howitzer shell value. And then in the yellow box is canister. The green box is the combat value modifier, which I'll go over everything on the counters in a little bit. But you can see that some of these numbers only apply to the brigade game if you're using the ammo rules. So we also have down here the howitzer chart, which applies only to brigade game artillery. So it's blue for the shell combat value, which also on this side, if you notice, the round shot is white on the counter, the canister is yellow matching the counter, and the shell is blue matching the fire value to use on the counter. So the scatter diagram, we have some acrylic overlays to match that, and this is if the artillery is facing a hex side, and this is if it's facing a hex side or facing hex vertex. And so we put this on the map over the top of the target and point the arrow back towards the firing unit. And then if we miss, we roll 2 more dice to see where it lands within that area on the howitzer scatter diagram. And when you get these in your game, these come covered with a little plastic film to protect it during shipping and manufacturing. So if you see some bubbling on the counter, you'll want to remove that plastic. So I have not removed the plastic on this yet, and you can see it's peeling up a little bit on the side there if you can see that. But if you see some bubbling, that's due to the plastic protective coating that's on there, and you can safely peel that off. Here's the other one for facing the hex side. So then one more player aid card I want to go over before I start getting into the rules in more detail. So this is player aid card 3, which is the all games player aid card. So this applies to all 3 rule sets, soldiers, battalion, and brigade. So we have the units, different types of units, and what it means on each counter. And we have a morale state diagram, and we have artillery cones of fire, which we also have some acrylic overlays for those to help you keep track of those on the map. And it's important to realize that different types of artillery has different ranges for different shots. So for a French 4-pounder canister is 1 to 2, so that'll only apply to those 2 axes. 3 to 5 for effective range applies to that, this area. And then long range, 6 to 7, which is out to here. So not everything can fire out to 8. So in the game, everything's limited to a max range of 8 hexes, although in the brigade game, rolling shot can bound past that a little bit. And that's mainly because everybody's firing over open sights in this period, and an individual man or individual horseman a kilometer away is a very small target and very hard to hit at that range. The guns can shoot out much further than that, but actually hitting what you're aiming at is difficult. Okay, so let's see, back to the other player area card. So for units, we've got, there's 3 types of leaders: overall commanders, regular leaders, and then aides de camp down here. So overall commander has a sash on his counter to identify him as the overall commander. In the circle is their command range modifier. So for overall commanders, the command range only applies to his direct subordinate attached units. And I'll get into that a little bit later. He has a leader initiative modifier on his counter, which he can use to help other leaders roll for initiative, which is only used in the battalion or brigade game and not in the soldiers game. There's an efficiency rating, which is also used only in the battalion and brigade game, and so he can lend his leader initiative modifier to up to 1 leader his efficiency rating for their own initiative modifier. And fire strength modifier, if that's on the counter, not all leaders have that. That applies only to artillery fire. A combat value modifier, if the leader is leading units in assault or charge, his morale modifier that you can apply to any units he's stacked with. And then in the middle there, the X's are similar to the NATO symbols, so that marks Massena as an overall, or as a army commander with 4 X's in the standard NATO style. So 1 X for brigade, 2 for division, 3 for corps, 3 for army, or 4 for army, excuse me. And then we have Loisson here, who's a corps leader. He has a little bit better limb and ER efficiency rating, but otherwise the values are the same. Cavalry units, which have 1 cross belt, which is the NATO symbol for cavalry. He's got 4 strength points, 2 steps, a morale value of 25. The ornament here identifies him as light cavalry over here. So all the ornaments that mean something are in this chart here. If it's an ornament that's not in the chart, then it's just pictorial only and it has no special meaning. So for example, Massena has a baton because he's a marshal, and he has a wreath just to mark him for decoration for Napoleon's guys. And combat value modifier, which all combat units have. Infantry is marked by 2 cross belts, just like the NATO symbol. And he's got a line fire strength value when he's in line formation. When he's in skirmishers en débandade, which we just call full skirmish mode or entirely in skirmishers, he's in the pink box there. That's his fire strength. This is the number of skirmisher strength points he can deploy in the exponent here when he's in skirmishers on tirailleur mode, which is a little bit different than the skirmishers on débandade mode. And then that's the number of strength points in the unit, his morale value. The little bugle indicates that he can go full skirmish mode, skirmishers en débandade. And then if it's in a red circle, that means it's rifle armed, and he just has 1 step and a combat value modifier. Okay, artillery has the round shot, which we've covered in the white box, shell in the blue box, canister in the yellow box, which again matches the colors on the rows of the chart. And then the background color also matches which row you should use on the chart for that box. And then the horse symbol there means he's horse artillery. This is guard artillery, I guess. It's got a good morale value. And then we have various ID markings, which are purely for helping identify the unit. So the top stripe marks the corps color, the middle stripe marks the division, the bottom marks the brigade. There may be exceptions in some cases, and the scenario rules will note that. If they've got a little wings on the side, which could be black or white banding on the counter, that means it's an asset. You notice that the aide-de-camp has no echelon marking on it. That's one way to identify him. And he's got a little extra braid there to help identify him as an aide-de-camp. The markers have color matching values for the most part, so combat value modifiers are in green, command modifiers are in gray, and these will match things in the sequence of play also. Target modifier, so if it applies to the target, then it's in a white box with a red text. If it applies to the firing unit, then it's in a red box with a white text. And I think that's about it for units. So let's take a quick look at morale. So there's 5 morale states. So we have normal state, disorder, shaken, broken, or rout. And normally, when you fail a morale check, you drop 1 level. So you could go from normal to disorder to shaken to broken. And shaken, they're going to retreat 1 hex. You can see that in this box here. Fail a morale check or disorder check, retreat 1 hex. Doesn't apply to unlimited artillery, they stay in place. Then if they are in shaken state and they fail a morale check again, they're going to become broken, which means they have to retreat 3 hexes if they're infantry or 6 if they're cavalry, and artillery is eliminated. The other case in the green boxes is if they, which again is the kind of close combat color, if they fail an offensive or defensive morale check, which happens during assault or charge, then they're going to drop 2 morale states. So if they were in the normal, they'd go to the shaken morale state, or if they lose the close combat, they're going to be eliminated if they're artillery, or just go to shaken and retreat 1 hex. Or if you're already in disorder, then you're going to end up breaking if you're in close combat. So being in disorder in close combat is dangerous because you can go to the broken state in one step. Then once you're in the broken state, you get 1 chance to, or you get basically 2 chances to rally. If you pass your rally check, you're going to go back to the shaken state. If you fail your rally check, you're going to retreat again and then go to the rout state. Then in the rout state, if you pass your rally check, you can go back to shaken, or if you fail, you're going to be eliminated. And that basically indicates that during this time period, if units break and keep running, they're not going to come back, and somebody will go back and collect them a couple of terrain features to the rear at nightfall. So again, this player aid card is mostly to remind people of what's in the rules and not necessarily required during play once you become familiar with the game. So the artillery cones of fire, like the artillery overlays, what type of formations are allowed in particular types of terrain, zone of control effects, and leader casualty summary. Then charge zones for the battalion brigade game. So in the soldiers game, there's no charge zones. You just move adjacent and conduct your close combat during the close combat segment. In the battalion and brigade game, you have a zone, so you move to where you are, and various things can happen in those zones. There's different types of reactions that the non-phasing player can do while the other player is moving. That includes during charge movement. Orders checks, which I'll go over that when I get to the command rules. Skirmish zone, so in the battalion and brigade game, the non-rifle armed units have a 2-hex skirmish zone, which means they can attack anybody in there, and there's restrictions on the zone where it extends and doesn't extend, depending on terrain and depending on the presence of enemy units or friendly units. And then the pink is out to where rifle armed units can shoot. And in the battalion and brigade game, units can withdraw before combat. Assault and charge procedure summaries and disorder check events, things that trigger disorder checks. So just stuff to help jog your memory while you're playing. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go through the battalion game in a little more detail and highlight what happens in each section of the rules, and then also highlight the difference between the brigade and soldiers game as they relate to the battalion game. So there's quite a bit of repetition between the battalion and soldiers game. So again, the soldiers game is standalone, the battalion game is standalone, and the brigade game builds on top of the battalion game. So if you're playing the soldiers game, you don't have to refer to the battalion game rules at all, or if you're playing the battalion game, you don't have to refer to the soldiers game rules at all. You can just refer to those sections. And things that are different between the brigade game and the battalion game are marked by a little bicorn symbol, and then things that apply to the battalion game and brigade game but not the soldiers game are marked with a shako. Okay, a bunch of boilerplate stuff, which it's a good idea to kind of skim that if you're not familiar with the period terminology, explanations of everything that's on the counters, markers, and a kind of a glossary section for terminology that you may not be familiar with if you are playing 20th century games and not used to Napoleonic games. Some period terminology in there. So then the sequence of play here, and I'll go through that, and then we have another player aid card that has the sequence of play on it, assault procedure, charge procedure, and reaction charges for the battalion and brigade games. And I like to put things in procedures because it helps clarify when things should happen in a particular sequence, so that you're not saying, well, does this happen first or does that happen second, you know, and figure out what's going on. So I think that helps keep things straight. And then the colors on the sequence of play kind of correspond to colors that are used on the markers and colors that are used on the charts to identify when things occur. So the first thing we do, weather. This game has some fog in it for Fuentes de Honoro, which is the only weather that occurs. Then we have the command segment. So the basis of the command segment is the first thing we do is roll for initiative. Each player rolls one 10-sided die and applies their commander's initiative modifier to it. So both Massena and Wellington are 4s in this game, so they're pretty evenly matched. But they only get their command initiative modifier when he's actually on the map. So otherwise we don't add anything to it. And then some different things happen on the north map where command initiative modifier is up there, because it's almost an independent theater for what's going on during the game. So we roll the initiative, and the high die roll wins. High modified die roll. If either player rolls a 0, we consult the random events chart, which in that case we'll roll 2 more dice and see what the random event is, and that'll indicate who won the initiative for that turn. It's fairly evenly distributed as far as probability. And then we resolve the random event and get on with the placing orders. So the main thing about winning initiative is you get to decide which player goes first that turn. So if you're prepared, you can set yourself up for a double turn. So if you win the initiative, you could give the other player initiative, and then hope to get initiative again the next turn. And then if you get initiative in the next turn, you can do a double turn, which can really cause the other side some issues. And in this game, they're fairly balanced, so it's unlikely that you'll be able to get a double turn often, except for by luck. In other games where Napoleon is present and somebody like maybe Wormser is present, you might have a case where Napoleon can get the initiative every turn and basically decide when he wants to do a double turn and sort of run circles around the opponent. Okay, so then we have the command attachments phase, which allows you to attach some units to subordinate leaders and various other things during the turn. Then the orders phase, where we use our modified initiative roll to index the orders chart, which is mostly on this chart except for the Marshall's game where it's on the map. So you'd use your command initiative modifier plus the die roll for initiative and index this chart to see how many orders you get each turn. And then you can apply those. And for this game, there's some limitations on how they can apply to orders on the north map and orders on the south map, since they're two separate maps and almost separate theaters, and you'll see those in the game special rules. So after we decided, got our orders and placed them on units, and I'll go over orders in a bit. We have orders initiative, so units that are not in command of their superior can potentially roll for initiative to get their own order, either an attack or a reserve order. So then we have the first player turn, which was chosen by the winner of the initiative in the command segment. So we have the first player is the phasing player, and the second player is the non-phasing player, which is typical wargamer vocabulary. So recovery segment, we do a rally phase. Cavalry can recover from charges, removing spent markers. Artillery resupply, which happens only in the soldiers and brigade game, or fatigue recovery, which only happens in the brigade game. although there are some exceptions depending on special scenario rules. Then we have a fire segment. So if you're familiar with ASL, that might be considered prep fire. So all friendly units, or all phasing units and artillery can fire. Then we have the artillery fire segment, which applies to the non-phasing player. So only the non-phasing player gets to fire his artillery at that time. So artillery is basically going to get a fire twice every turn, once during their friendly fire segment and once during the non-phasing player artillery fire segment. Then we have a movement segment, which we have an attack orders phase, which does not occur in the soldier's game. So if we look back at our player aid card here, any leader that has an orders check on it, if an order is placed on that leader, he has to roll against his limb value. If he rolls greater than his limb value, then he's going to have to pass his order to a subordinate units up to his ER value. So if we look at the command display, and let's see if I can find Moissan, well, here we go. Drouet, the Comte d'Erlon. So he is in charge of the 9th Corps, and he has a limb of 1 and an efficiency rating of 1. And he's got the orders check symbol. So if you place an order on him and he failed his orders check, then he could only pass the order to one of his subordinate leaders, or keep it himself, which would apply just to him and his units that report directly to him. And I'll get into that a little more in the orders. Okay, so once we've done that for any leaders that require an orders check, which they don't all do, then we check the command status to see who's in or out of command. And once they're in command, once they're out of command, they can only become in command on the next player turn, during the command status phase, or during a reserve command status phase of the non-phasing player turn. Then we do our movement for all units that are, whether they're in or out of command, and units that are out of command have reduced movement allowance, and orders are not applied to them. So if their superior has an order for attack or reserve, then that does not apply to units that are out of command. Then we have the reserve segment. Also, during the movement segment, while moving, units can declare assaults or charges, but they're not resolved until the close combat segment. So during the reserve segment, which applies to the non-phasing player, units with reserve orders, we do a reserve orders check just like the attack orders phase check, except it only applies to units with reserve orders. Then we see who is in command or out of command with respect to units with reserve orders. And again, so movement of enemy units during the movement segment may affect which units are in command during the reserve command status phase. So that's why we check during the movement and reserve segments. Then units in reserve do their movement. So then we get to the close combat segment, where we resolve assaults and charges, and units in the brigade game do a fatigue check if they were for various activities that they may have been engaged in during the turn. And so you can see during the effect of reserve orders is that the phasing player could declare his assaults and charges here, and then during the reserve segment, those units could potentially move to different places. They could either withdraw out of range of a charge zone, or they could withdraw from close combat, or you could deploy some limbered artillery right in front of them to give them a big surprise during the close combat segment, or reinforce hacks or whatever might be necessary. So that's how you would use reserve orders, which I think some players have difficulty kind of envisioning how they would use those. Then we do it all again for the second player in reversing the roles of the two players. And then we have end of turn segment, which replace leaders that have become casualties, fight fires if there are any during the brigade game, expend ammunition for artillery that's has created a bombardment zone, and then we move the turn marker forward. Okay, this is all just explaining the sequence of play. So command, I've explained the three types of leaders, and so we'll go back and quickly the command displays. So for this iteration of the system, I decided to put the command displays on single cards to help people that may not have enough space to set them all up if we had big displays that take a lot of space. So typically you have the leader of the organization, so in this case the 9th Corps. His command range is 5, which matches the number in the box here as a reminder. The color of the stripe matches the stripe on top of the counter. And then Fournier here has a command range of 3, Claparede 4, and Conroux 4, and so on and so forth, down on the line to the bottom of the command hierarchy. And so during scenarios, it may be helpful to set up the units on the command displays and then move them to the map or leave them on there if they enter as reinforcements, just to help you keep track of which units belong to who and until they're ready to enter play. Okay, leaders can be captured, and there's a procedure for deciding replacements, which typically that's just on the back of the counter. So on the back of the counter there's a side that's marked REPL to show you that that's the replacement side of who that leader is. And in some cases, if a superior leader, typically like a corps leader or something, is flipped over, then his subordinate units may need to be flipped over as the senior division commander becomes the corps commander and the senior brigade commander becomes the division commander, etc. And that's typically how that works. So command status, if they remain, for the battalion game and soldiers game, if they remain within the command range of their leader, they're in command. So any of these cavalry units remaining within command of Fournier within 3 hexes, it makes them in command. And you can see in some of these cases that there's multiple units for the same, or multiple counters for the same unit. It's like the 7th Chasseurs, we have an A and a B counter. As long as the B counter remains adjacent to the A counter, it's in command if the A counter is within 3 of Fournier. Or vice versa. If the B counter is within 3 and the A counter is adjacent, then they're within 3, then they're in command. And that's how we handle some larger units and some of the cavalry, especially the cavalry units where they're kind of broken up into squadrons. And again, as I said, command status, if they're reduced movement allowance, and they can't force march and they can't receive orders. One important thing for Fuentes de Onoro is their garrison. So the village of Fuentes de Onoro, which is right here, is a garrison. So the British player can assign units to the garrison, and typically that's determined by the scenario. And it'll say if the player can attach or remove additional units and which units they can attach or remove from the garrison. And if everybody's forced out of the garrison is dissolved and everybody returns to their normal command status to their leader on the command, as shown on the command display. Attachments. So some divisions may have, or some divisions and corps may have independent units that are attached to them. So in this case, Drouet has a sapper company and 4 battalions of combined grenadiers, which he can either retain command of those, so if he receives an order he can retain that and send those guys in to assault or do whatever he wants them to do. Or he can assign these guys to subordinate units, so he could assign all these to Claparede or Vichery or Girard or Conroux. Possibly Fournier, but that would be unusual, assigned to a cavalry leader, and probably would be a waste of movement allowance for the cavalry. So I think players, I don't prohibit that, but it's usually not a good idea. Okay, so orders. So there are 2 types of orders, attack orders and reserve orders. So the main purpose of attack orders is you get to assault or charge. If you don't have an attack order, you can still move and fire, but you can't initiate assaults or charges, which is the decisive form of combat. If you want something to happen, you need to assault or charge. Otherwise, you're just kind of trading shots, and it takes a long time to make anything to happen unless you get some really lucky dice with just shooting at each other. So the main thing, if you want a piece of real estate, you got to send in an assault or a charge. You place orders on leaders, and we've gone a little bit over the orders checks. Orders initiative, leaders that are out of command can roll their own to get roll their initiative to get a order of their own, which typically their values are small unless he's a really exceptional leader, capable of independent action. So the orders check, there's that little symbol. If you roll less than or equal, then they get complete success, and the order applies to everyone in command of the leader and all subordinates that are also in command. And it's partial success, which you have to pass it to a number of leaders equal to his efficiency rating. So most of the leaders have a relatively low efficiency rating, so they'll typically pass it to 1 subordinate leader. And we've gone over the overall commander. He can lend his leader initiative modifier to a subordinate if he wants to. Basic stacking rules, units of formation. So If you're familiar with the La Bataille, you can see you got a column facing a hex side with 3 front hexes, 2 flank, 1 rear, and facing a vertex, front, flank, rear. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel unless it's necessary. So road column, reduced front and flank, or increased flank and rear hexes. So in this game, road column is extremely vulnerable. It's not like regular column at all. It's a non-combat formation. It's for guys just marching along in whatever cadence they want and not maintaining any real formation. They fall out if they get too tired to keep marching or whatever. They're just not ready for combat. So in this, if an enemy unit moves adjacent to a unit in road column, they're going to break and run away. So you generally do not want to use it if the enemy is anywhere near and can sneak a cavalry unit in there and rout all your guys in road column. Not a good thing. You got to be very careful with that. Let's see. Okay. Also, we have the usual square. So units can form square. So in the soldiers and battalion game, it's the regular open square that you see in the Waterloo movies. Then in the brigade game, there's also a closed square, which if you're in close column, then you can move to closed square, which can be done faster, but has a higher target modifier because it's a very dense formation. Okay, skirmishers. So in this soldiers game, we still have skirmishers on débandade and skirmishers on tirailleur, which are the 2 types of skirmishers. So skirmishers on tirailleur. Skirmishers on tirailleur in the battalion game have skirmish zones. In the soldiers game, they just have a range of 2 hexes that they can shoot out. So these in the green are the skirmish zones that are in the battalion game. And it can be restricted by the presence of enemy units or terrain that the skirmishers can't cross. And then the pink zone here is the rifle zone for rifle armed units. And for the rifle zone, you have to have a line of sight to the target hex. For the skirmish zone, the green zone, you do not need to have a line of sight. And so this is an example of where the terrain blocks. So if A was a friendly unit or an enemy unit, then you couldn't shoot into hex C there. And then E, out here you need a line of sight, so you'd have a line of sight from either of those 2 hexes to there, or to there you would not have a line of sight, because A is blocking, so you can't have a skirmish zone there. So there you would not be able to target D, and that goes into detail and all that. So skirmishers, the regular skirmishers, so skirmishers on tirailleur is when the parent unit is in a regular line or column, and you want to deploy some skirmishers out in front of the unit. You would put an SK marker on them. And so for the SK marker, the 1 indicates their fire strength that they can use on the fire chart. So in this example, it's a fire strength of 2. Skirmishers on débandade, which remember the bugle indicates they can go full skirmish mode. So some of the cases, if it's just a single company with 1 step, you can just flip the counter over and it's got SED on the back. And that shows you what their values are in SED, which typically are the same. So they would use the value in the pink box for SED formation, and they have all around facing when they're in SED formation. If they're in skirmishers on tirailleur, then they have whatever facing the parent unit is, whether it's line or column. And if there's enough space, I often just put the counter in front to indicate where the skirmishers are and what unit they belong to. Okay, so we've gone over that, we've gone over some artillery stuff, we've gone over morale states a little bit. So units in disorder are shaken, they cannot change formation. Units in broken or rout are not in any type of formation, they're just running away, sauve qui peut. And units in disorder are shaken retain their formation, so if they were in square, they would be either a disordered square or a shaken square. Once they break, they would no longer be in square. They would just be in no formation at all and running away. Use rally checks to recover. Okay, so for movement, it's pretty standard stuff for war games. We've got movement allowance, movement points for each unit. In the battalion game, there's 3 movement rates for units. You can normal movement allowance, out of command movement allowance, and force march. They can't force march in the soldiers game. And the main thing that's different between the soldiers game and the battalion game are disorder checks. So when units move and do certain things, they'll have to take disorder checks during the player's movement. So if you change formation, cross hex side obstacles, expend too many movement points in certain formations, or enter more than one MDT or HDT hex during a single movement. And brigade game adds a few more things, evolution checks, ending their movement stacked with different units in line that make a passage of lines, and performing backup movement. So basically you do your movement, add up all the modifiers for the things that trigger disorder checks, and roll the dice and see if they pass or fail. And they lose a morale state if they fail. The Zocs, pretty standard stuff for war games. Line of sight, so the line of sight system is a little bit different than what people may be used to. So the fundamental assumption is that slopes are concave gradients, and where they are not, we mark them with a military crest or a de facto military crest. And that's all explained in these rules. And it's really pretty simple. You're basically calculating a slope between the potential obstruction and the target you're trying to get to, the observed hex. And if the slope on the upper part is lower than the slope on the bottom part, then the LOS is blocked. And so most of the rules are discussing what constitutes a potential obstruction, which in this case is trees, in this diagram here. And there's an example here that shows a bunch of different cases and a table that goes with it and shows you all the cases where that occurs and the reasoning behind why it's blocked or why it's clear. And on Board Game Geek there's a paper that you can look at that goes into detail on the explanation of the LOS rules and the intent behind them and how they match up to the maps. So fire combat is really simple. We just have one hex fire at another target hex, and we simply add up the combat or the fire strength values on the units that are firing. So this one, say we're firing round shot, would have a fire strength of 2. We add any potential modifiers. So if it was canister range, we'd add +3. So we'd start on the 2 column and add 3, which brings us up to the 5 column. And then we'd roll 2 dice and index the table and apply the results. And the results are in the form of morale checks with modifiers and step losses. And there are fire strength limits, so there's a limit to the number of units that can fire out of a hex, which is on the fire limits chart. So artillery can fire up to 6 strength points, line 5 strength points, skirmishers on débandade 4, and brigade game we distinguish between a 2 rank line and a 3 rank line. And the top unit can always fire, regardless of how many strength points it has. Okay, so you can have multiple hexes fire at a single target in a single fire phase. So a unit can go from normal to broken in the course of a single fire phase if they get if they're the subject of intense fire. And when we do that, we roll up all the dice and then apply the results all at once. And there's a handy fire track that helps you keep track and using these number markers to indicate the number of times you got the same result on the fire track. And that for this game is on the turn record track. Okay, close combat. Close combat consists of assaults and charges. So for assaults, it's important to note that you can declare an assault anytime during your move and designate a target hex. And that's important for some of the rules, particularly with the battalion game, where declaring an assault at the beginning of your move may be advantageous. I guess that's true for the soldiers game as well, but more so for the battalion game. So there's pretty much basic things. So if for some reason the target hex, I guess I should back up a little bit. Recall in the sequence of play that the assaults are marked during the movement phase and the charges are marked during the movement phase, but we resolve them in the close combat segment, which occurs afterwards. So when we finally get to that point, You may have a case where there's an empty target hex because the other side withdrew or some other enemy action caused it to be vacated. Then some types of units can withdraw before combat. That's mostly cavalry and skirmishers. And if the target hex is empty because of these two things, then you just advance and the assault's pretty much over. Then we have an attacker morale check, defender morale check, and we remove skirmishers, skirmish SK number markers, not SED markers. And that's mainly because during the assault the skirmishers get pushed into the parent unit and are no longer out in front of the unit. Then the defender makes a defensive fire attack, and then the attacker makes an offensive fire attack, and morale checks from those are more severe. They add -20 to the dice when you make those morale checks due to offensive and defensive fire. And if you fail a morale check from offensive and defensive fire, you lose 2 steps of morale. So you could go from normal to shaken or disorder to broken in one combat. If they're in a fortified post or a built-up area hex, then we go to cold steel combat. And if the enemy has left the hex, then the attackers can advance, and then we're done. Okay, charges are similar, where we initiate them in the or mark them in the movement phase, and units have a charge zone, which we saw on the Player Aid 3 card, if I can find it. So all units have a charge zone of 4 hexes, whether they're in column or line, and that's the zones as they're shown for those formations. And the green is a reaction charge zone, out to the pink is the regular charge zone. So they can charge anybody within those zones that they can reach. So for example, if there was blocking terrain here, they wouldn't be able to go around and get to a unit over here. They could work their way through to there. So the first thing we do when we resolve charges is they do charge movement, and it's similar to assault, where you can have empty target hex because of enemy action, or you can have units that can withdraw before combat, which is more limited during charges. And then we have a slightly different procedure for when we charge infantry and artillery versus when we charge cavalry. So for charging infantry and artillery, they take their defender morale check, they remove their SK number markers, then they do their defensive fire. And then we account for any terrain, so crossing hex side obstacles. Then with cavalry, we immediately go to cold steel. And there's no offensive fire from cavalry. So we resolve the cold steel combat and then do advance after combat. And for cavalry versus cavalry, they skip this stuff and just go straight to step 5 and cold steel combat. If they win, they can try and pursue the target, or they may try and not pursue the target if they pass a recall check. There's a possibility of a follow-on charge, which they have to take a morale check to try and attempt a follow-on charge. So you can get cases where you can charge 2 or 3 or maybe even maximum of 4 units during a charge, and try and run them all off, particularly if they're in a vulnerable state like broken or shaken or something like that. Although passing the morale check, if they become shaken, they end. So after the charges are all done, including the follow-on charges, then the cavalry can regroup and try and get a little bit out of harm's way. And then we mark everybody with mark the cavalry with spent markers, and those get removed during future recovery segments. I'm not going to go into all this in detail. We'll just leave it for that some units can withdraw from combat, and you can pursue and reaction charge. Okay, so the last thing in the battalion game is reactions. So there are various reactions, and the conditions are spelled out of when the reaction occurs and when it is triggered. So example, for a reaction fire, it's going to occur when units change formation within or exit the ZOC of enemy infantry. And for skirmishers have an extended reaction zone, so units that enter a ZOC or enter the front hexes of skirmishers trigger reaction fire. Artillery also has an extended reaction zone, where if they move into the zone of control, they trigger a reaction. And reaction formation change, so this is what you normally call when you're in the face of enemy cavalry, you can try and form square. The brigade game adds some additional things to do besides forming square. They can change facing, or they can do a refuse flank or anything of that nature in the brigade game. Then we have reaction charges. So reaction charges can occur when enemy units move within the reaction zone of the cavalry. And you don't get to do it for every hex in the reaction zone. You just get to try it once to try and limit the amount of times the player can say, well, I'll try this one, I'll try this one, try this one. And just, that's kind of silly. They're either going to go or they're not. And that's based on a morale check. If they pass the morale check, they can go. If they don't pass the morale check, they can't reaction charge. And it can occur during charge movement, which in that case we call it a counter charge. And it's resolved similar to a regular charge, but it has a little bit of a reduced sequence. But it's the same kind of steps. And then we have some terrain, which are general rules for terrain, so description of built-up areas and the categories of terrain. Fortified posts, which some buildings can be turned into fortified posts, typically stout buildings such as churches or other stone buildings. And some earthworks in some of the games that have earthworks. So there are a handful of earthworks that can be created in the Fuentes de Enero game if you play onto onto May 6th. And some weather effects, nighttime rules, and fires for the brigade game and how to fight fires. So that's pretty much it for the battalion game. Okay, so I'll give you a quick overview of the brigade game. So the heart of the brigade game are the brigade game command rules. And those are where you move your units in two types of grand tactical formations, which are line of battle and grand column. So here we have an example of a grand column and the requirements to be in command. We'll go over this in more detail with some counters on the map. And then we have a line of battle, again showing some detail of which units are in command. So basically, in the grand tactical formations, you have a directing unit, which is where the brigade leader stacks. And everybody basically has to do what the directing unit does. So if the directing unit moves forward, everybody else in the grand tactical formation has to move forward. If he changes facing, everybody else has to change facing. So with and then movement is conducted in a different manner than in the battalion or soldiers game. So basically, have segmented moves where, for example, here's a unit in the line of battle. They want to move two hexes forward, so they would do that segment, move those 2 hexes forward. They want to wheel, so they would do that wheel and complete it, and we call that an evolution. And then if they move 2 more hexes forward, then they would do that as a segment. So it's kind of like the grand tactical formation is one giant unit that's moving in unison. Okay, so evolutions are where you want to go from grand column to line of battle, or line of battle to grand column. Or if you want to change facing. So here's some various deployment methods for going from grand column to line of battle, and the reverse. And here are some evolutions for changing facing. So we got to change the front by marching out, change the front by wheeling, change the front to the rear by pivoting in place, which is a fairly complicated affair. So at the end of an evolution, we take an evolution check. If they fail, then everybody in the grand tactical formation has to take a disorder check. There's an optional order of battle rule, which has to do with keeping your units in their proper order. And I don't think too many people have tackled that yet. It's a little bit confusing and takes a little bit getting used to of what the terminology means and remembering your lefts from your rights. So the brigade game also adds some additional rules for detached regiments. Lots of different, chrome for formation. So you've got multiple specialist types of columns. So the column in the battalion game still applies, but you've also got close column, column of attack, division mass, and open column. And then units in line can back up or about face or march by the flank. And we have quarter wheeling into line or close square from close column. Rules for passage of the lines, rules for 2 ranks versus 3 ranks. Handling refuse flanks, refusing the left or the right flank to present a front on that side. And the fire pattern for those. Units can go prone, lay down. Usually that's the British, but other nations occasionally did it as well, although not as commonly. Artillery, we add a lot more chrome there, so we've got different types of rounds. We introduce the concept of trains and caissons. And using the caissons is optional. If you want to continue to use the battalion game artillery ammunition resupply, you can, or you can use the caissons. We have bombardment zones, which is basically kind of a grand battery rule, where you can get a bunch of units and bombard everybody that's in the zone or moves through the zone. Rolling shot, so you can ricochet fire to bounce on the ground and hit more targets if they're all stacked up in a nice rows, which they typically are on dense battlefields where you've got multiple lines of battle, one behind the other, with two in the front and some reserves. And we've got howitzer attacks, which is only in the brigade game. And you don't necessarily need a line of sight for a howitzer attack, but it'll improve your odds if you do. Wave charges, so it was typical for cavalry to send in multiple waves so that the first wave would receive the brunt of the musketry fire and the succeeding waves could go in without getting hit by the musket fire and hopefully break the enemy. We have additional reactions, which I talked about previously. Changing facing, about facing, quarter wheeling, refusing flanks, deploying skirmishers, changing stacking order. And there's also an additional type of reaction in the brigade game, reaction move. So cavalry or limited horse artillery can try and move away when enemy infantry moves adjacent or moves close, so that they can don't have to stand there and take whatever fire the infantry is going to deliver to them. And we also add fatigue, so certain things engaging in non-skirmish fire combat, assaulting or force marching will force you to take a fatigue check at the end of the turn. And then if you get fatigued, there's 4 levels of fatigue: 0, which is normal, and then fatigue level 1, 2, 3. And the modifiers are on the counters, and they get progressively worse as you go from fatigue level 1 to fatigue level 3. We also have some limited intelligence rules, which is also optional because you have to be able to have another player to play that. And we have that's what all the obscured markers are for on the counter sheets, is marking units that cannot be seen, and they get additional fire benefits, which typically is only going to happen from artillery, because they're the only things that can hit targets that can't be seen if you use howitzer fire or ricochet fire. Then if they're far enough away from the enemy for all these obscured markers, you can create dummy brigades and kind of move stacks of obscured markers around to kind of give some limited intelligence to what the other player knows about where your forces are. And as soon as you have a line of sight, then all those obscured markers goes away, so it gives you something to use your light cavalry for a little bit of scouting. Okay, and the occasional observation points, which are marks on the map to give you a little higher observation level from those points. And that's pretty much it for the brigade game for a quick overview. And next I'll go more into detail on the command rules, and I'll start moving a few pieces around on the map to kind of give you a more clear idea of what that means.